On this edition of Pipeline Things, we bring back Dr. Keith Leewis, right? It's Doctor,
yeah.
who joins us to talk about the Basic Rupture Framework and joining the United States as the 51st state. Welcome, Keith.
Thank you very much. But I thought it was going to be 13 states.
The first time we've had a guest participate on the intro. Join us for Pipeline Things. Welcome to the PPIM edition of Pipeline Things. This is our third time shooting at PPIM and the first time that we have Miss Producer here and everyone's healthy. So I'm really excited. So if you're joining us on this episode, we have a return guest, which means two things. I assume that he really enjoyed the last time and that he likes us. And that is Mr. Keith Leewis, and who's soon going to be a member of the 51st state for the United States. So, Keith, how do you feel about that as a Canadian citizen?
Well, it's not for sale, but if it is, it's 13 states. And, you know, we're kind of like communists, so they'll all be social democratic. You know what that's going to do to the Senate? Anyway.
But you just
now
get
that
two
we did,
senators. That's all you get, right? We're just
we're going
one.
to get 13 states. You know what the better idea is?
What's that?
Why don't you get rid of the East and North, and the West Coast and the Northeast?
Just partition them off?
No, they'll become part of Canada. And then
there are people here who might take you up on that offer, but we have some of our employees work on that side, so I don't know if we can just cut them off.
Yeah.
No, you wouldn't cut them off. It's just like
international company.
It's like Euro, except in North America, right? And you know what? We could also then have a pass, so you go between both countries, and you wouldn't have to worry about immigration from Canada anymore.
Man, they don't like me.
They
it
don't.
is true. Did they let you in easily? Did they give you a hard time?
Oh, shit. I had to do a lot of paperwork to get into the States.
Really? Are
Yeah.
you serious?
Yeah, I had like 6 inches worth. And, you know, Melania, I don't know
Did you
how
tell
much
him you knew
paperwork
us?
she did, because I got an H-1B.
Oh,
Yeah, that was
nice.
before I think you guys were still in
Probably
high
diapers,
school.
yeah. Well, welcome. Thanks for playing along with that joke. You did so the audience is like, wow.
What was that?
What just happened at PPIM? That's the state of things here. We're feeding off the energy and the vibe. So, Keith, we brought you back because in this series, we're covering papers that were done at PPIM, and you wrote a paper called Basic Rupture, a framework to improve the likelihood of failure consequences. Now, in full disclosure to the audience, I was familiar with this because you've been trying to incorporate this into B31.8.
Yeah.
For quite some time, and it's a massive addition, and we've struggled with where do we put it? Do we put it in the body? And so when I saw this opportunity, I was like, I think this is a cool topic to bring you back on again. So,
Well, B31.8's been simplified. We just referenced it now, so we didn't put it in the appendix.
oh,
Okay,
really?
So that, and having a good reference is important. So yeah, it makes it simpler for the language.
Well, that's good.
But
Make it easier
you
to get through
still have to
31.8.
do the homework.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about this, if you don't mind. So last time we brought you on in the Sage series, you talked about the evolution of PIR, which is still one of my favorite episodes when you talked about where that came from. And you talked a lot about the fact that we have little to no granularity on the consequence of
That's
failure.
correct. Yeah.
And so is this work the evolution of that moving forward, or is that how you pursued this work here?
Well, that's what I think. So right now, you're either an HCA or you're not. Black and white, right?
Yes.
So if we can take that and put it into, if you're in an HCA and it leaks, that's less of a consequence. And if you rupture, it's what's in the PIR equation already, right? Because we assume that everything ruptures and we know it doesn't.
Interesting. So this gives us the ability to further break down HCAs and even really non-HCAs too. It's not just limited to HCAs, but it does give you enhanced granularity in your HCA locations.
So if you remember, HCAs are not in B31.8.
Correct.
And that's because you're supposed to do it from start to finish. But back in 2001, we couldn't do the entire pipeline for a variety of reasons. And so we worked with the FEMSA to start an HCA. The FEMSA's always wanted to do more, and so now we have MCAs.
What was the original promise? Didn't you tell us there was an original promise?
The original idea was to keep it reasonable, so we do 20 houses, right, and identified sites. And now we're down to 5 houses for MCAs.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was going to say, 'cause
So-
now we have HCAs and MCAs, at least stateside, right?
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
and but maybe the promise you were talking about was the INGA. So we were trying to get 10 years ago to try and get anywhere there's a house done by this year.
I was about to say there was a promise I remembered. It was to
Yeah.
have like 100% done by 2025.
No, 2030.
2030.
100, because that would count the parts we don't have houses
Ah.
But
in, right, or identified sites.
and it's not maybe from a house perspective, like a consequence perspective, but from a probability of failure perspective, we do see some of the new regulation generally addressing that. So, for example, like if we look at assessments outside of HCAs, that's where they kind of target MCAs. So you have to assess MCAs. However, if there is a feature that's reported that meets criteria, even if it's not in an HCA or an MCA, you still have to respond to it, right?
Yeah, so that's why ILI is so good, because it goes from launcher to receiver, and we get everything in between.
And now
Right.
regulation, I guess what I was getting to, now regulation kind of covers that full scope now, right? Whether it's, HCAs, MCAs, or if a feature is reported, even if it's not in an MCA, it still has a scheduled response to it.
Yeah, so the response scheduling in HCAs and MCAs is different
Yeah.
than what's left over,
Yeah.
right?
Correct.
And so the reason that we had the response in there was to try to make sure people were protected.
Yeah.
Okay, and we couldn't do the whole thing, so we had to limit the amount of response.
because of the
that we
486s. You told us that
Yeah.
last time. Those darn 486s.
Yeah,
So Keith, I want to bring it back around to the leak versus rupture. Tell us a little bit about how is this currently done, and really what's different in this framework that you've given.
well, most of us will actually use fitness for service to determine if it's going to leak or rupture, but not all of us know how to do that.
Yeah.
Especially the smaller companies where they may have only one person that does integrity. So this is a tool to help you understand where you're most likely going to fall. So we did in the order of 30,000 calculations with different toughness and diameters and wall thickness, and also different depth and length of corrosion and cracks. And we plotted that all up in clouds.
Mm.
Okay. And so then what we tried to do, and so this is in the report,
Sure.
and then what we tried to do is let's put some sense on that and use some of the things we've been doing over the years. Now, one of the problems we've used as a rule of thumb is 30%. Anything below 30% won't rupture.
30% of SMICE. So if the
SMICE.
pipeline's operating
Yeah.
below 30% of SMICE, I want the audience to hear that. The rule of thumb is that you shouldn't get a rupture.
Yeah.
You're less
Okay.
concerned of rupture.
Yeah. Well, there are
Yeah.
outliers.
Yeah.
And so that's why we wanted to try and get rid of the outliers as well.
Yeah.
So you'll see on the diagram, it's divided up into 3 areas.
Okay.
So in the lower area, so BR1, everything leaks. Okay. In the middle area, BR2, cracks, leak, and wall thickness like corrosion will rupture.
Got it.
Okay.
Yep.
And in the BR3, everything ruptures.
So help us see what you're saying. So we're looking at a 2-dimensional plot. Are we doing like lower left, middle, upper right, like a traditional?
It's a
Risk matrix
two-dimensional plot, and so the origin has everything leak.
Sure.
And the farther you go from the origin,
Crack and metal loss, rupture.
it goes to rupture.
Perfect.
And so the y-axis is actually the failure prediction
Okay.
over the actual pressure you're operating at. So
Okay.
the closer you come to the origin, the safer you are,
Yeah.
right? And the y-axis is actually the PIR. So the higher up you go, the bigger the damage area.
So x-axis is PIR.
Y is PIR.
Okay.
And X
X is failure pressure over MOP.
MOP, yeah.
Got it.
Or MAOP.
Or MAOP, sure.
Now,
Gotcha.
if you don't, because you need to do a calculation to get failure pressure.
Yeah.
And if you can't do that, you can substitute SMYS. So it makes it more conservative. And if you look on the paper, you'll see a couple of vertical lines, which are 72%, 60%, 50%, and 40%.
I thought you were going to get to 30%. Yeah, I thought you were going to get to 30%. No. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, it makes it easy, right?
Yeah,
you have two components.
Yeah. So if you start, I don't know if they can see it, but at the origin, the length of your vector is not only the chance of failure, but the consequence. So it's the kind of risk.
I got you.
But we don't have any receptors in there. Okay, so you still have to add the receptor part.
Yeah, and so, I think our first observation, right, for the audience is this is a means to understand risk without necessarily needing
a detailed risk
feature dimensions.
That's right. You don't need the feature dimension, and you don't have to do RP 579 or ASME.
Yeah, all you're doing is you're looking at PIR on your y-axis, which often we have because we're already doing things like HCA class, and then on the x-axis, you said you could default if you wanted to SMICE.
So you need the pressure that you're operating at.
Yeah.
And that's on both axes, right?
Yeah.
You need the diameter, so that's on the y-axis, right?
Yeah.
And you need to know your MAOP.
Which is on the bottom.
If you don't know that, you have a problem. So it gives you a start.
Yeah.
So, and again, I want to break it down. So you said there's 3 boundaries. There's BR1, which is everything's going to leak, right? Yeah. And I assume that's your lowest chance of failure and your lowest PIR.
Yeah.
I assume so. It's down. I would guess it's down here. Then you have.
It's actually, it looks sort of like this.
Oh, that's right. I remember. Yes.
And then the other one looks like this, right?
Gotcha. And then that rupture boundary, or that second, BR2 was cracks leak.
Yes.
But corrosion ruptures.
Yeah, that surprised us too.
It did surprise me a little bit when you said it, and I'm like, I remember going through this on the pre-show. Then you said it again, and I wrote it down, and I was like, let me repeat it. And then BR3 is everything.
Yeah.
Leaks.
So when you think about it, the crack has support around it as well at the ends and stuff. And when you're looking at general wall loss, it's really thinning and it's plastic, right? So
this is
some sort of as an aside, when we were building P squared, we took pipe with real defects in it that Shahani found, and we put a grid system on it. So we had strain gauges every centimeter, right? And when we pressurized it up, you could see the floor of the corrosion lift. And so there was tension, and the perimeter of the corrosion went into compression. It rotated. And then as you put more pressure, everything's in tension.
Yeah.
So I hadn't seen that before. That was really neat. I don't have that information because TransCanada, we did it for TransCanada. They own it all. But that was a sort of a nifty thing that sort of fits into what I'd always thought. And we had that. But so the thin area is the one that bursts, and the cracks are supported like they have a C-clamp on each end.
Got it.
It's kind of thing.
So I want to restate it for the audience before we move towards a break very clearly. This framework, what it does for you is if you're not doing advanced fitness for service calculations on a database of hypothetical features, corrosions, and cracks, you have managed for operators to define the likelihood of a rupture based on their operating conditions and the geometry of the pipe.
Yeah. So, because we did a whole range of geometries.
It's pretty neat.
Now, when we talked the last time, Chris asked, what was the lowest Sharpie?
Yeah.
And the lowest that we used was 2.5. But the new regulation that came out in 2019 after we wrote this is 1.
That's a great point to take a break on. So we're going to come back And we're going to pick up this conversation with Keith, where I also want to get into how do operators use this. I want to pause for a moment on that thought of we started with 2.5, now FEMS has given us 1. And what does this mean for you? How do you put this to practical use? We'll be right back. Welcome back to Pipeline Things, where we are in the midst of our discussion on the Basic Rupture Framework with Keith Leewis. So I want to recap it for the audience because Ms. Producer said I was unclear. So let me be quite clear. We have worked to date, which y'all have developed, is a framework that based on the operating conditions of the pipeline and the geometric properties of the pipeline, where you exist with regards to the risk of rupture or leak. And there are 3 categories. What they found is there is class BR1, which is you should only get leaks, no ruptures. Yeah. Then there's category BR2, which would either be you're operating at a higher pressure or I'll say maybe higher likelihood of failure. And in that category, you have corrosion that will rupture and cracks that will leak.
Correct.
And that was a surprise. We talked about it. And then the third category, BR3, is everything ruptures, whether it's a corrosion or a leak.
Yeah, the PIR is then the default.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So where I want to go with this for our audience and for you is 2 questions I really want to tackle. Who is this for? So you've already alluded to the fact that if you're running a bunch of fitness for service calculations, you would already get the information you need. So this is obviously for operators that maybe either don't have access, don't have time, or don't have resources.
Or don't have the data.
Or don't. Yeah. That's a good one.
And I think the who is also not just like the person, but rather the circumstance.
That too.
Right?
So you may have to use an outside firm to help you do your fitness for service.
Yeah.
You may not have time for them to do all of that. So this gives you the opportunity to take a stab at it in the beginning and then get better information later on.
Yeah.
So as we talked about, the origin is the safe spot, right?
Yeah.
And as you move up the x-axis, your probability of failure increases. And as you move up the y-axis, the damage increases because your diameter goes up too.
Which is why you call it risk, right?
Yeah.
You have consequence on one side and probability of failure on the other.
Yeah. So
in pretty basic terms.
Well, think of it as basic rupture is another way, because sometimes risk gets confused because people use it for a lot of things, like the probability of failure.
Yeah.
Sometimes they use risk. So if you take a vector from the origin, and you run it out, the longer the vector, the more chance of damage and probability of failure. So it's a type of risk, right?
Yeah.
So if you're going to decide where to do pigging first and you haven't done it, you should do it where the vector is the largest.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's the how am I using this, right? So let's get a little bit practical, right? What is the practical consumer for this? It may be somebody who's an LDC who has some unpiggable assets.
Yeah.
And they're trying to understand where they want to start investing resources to begin to mitigate some of the risk they have. Yeah. Well, where do I get my risk in the first place? This is an opportunity.
This is an opportunity.
This is a great way to start
risk.
Trying to figure out where risk is, to try to identify where I want to start investing resources for all these unknowns and uncertainties.
So for the more sophisticated one, they don't do anything other than the default. So it all ruptures. So this gives them a chance to take the HCA and the MCA and split it into 2 types of consequence, right?
Yeah.
And then, but for the less sophisticated one, it gives you a chance, do I actually spend money on this line to make it piggable or not?
So the question that comes to mind is, why should we trust this? It seems pretty simple, right? And you kind of alluded that a little bit, right? You said, well, we ran a lot of, scenarios and we created clouds. Talk to us a little bit about what that looked like again. So I could have faith in that, if I'm an LDC and I've got 200 assets and I'm trying to use this, how do I know that the conditions, the inputs that y'all used, I should feel some kind of comfort in that reaches my scenario for my asset?
Yeah, so if you go back to the report, you can see the clouds.
Yeah.
And so there are separate ones for cracks and separate ones for corrosion,
Yeah.
right? And so we use the clouds to try and put the lines in a reasonable spot.
Yeah. And what are the clouds?
Oh, the cloud
Yeah.
are the failure points
Mm.
for the different diameters, the different SMYS, and the
And hypothetical flaws.
Yeah, so we did the whole gamut, and we used the type of pipe that's out there. So
Yeah.
if there's not pipe in the PHMSA database, then we didn't use that diameter and that wall thickness. But we used all the other possibilities in there in order to cover it. And then we did a variety of different lengths and depths. So we only did the 2 parameter type, right? So we didn't do R string or anything
Sure.
of that nature. So we kept it simple, the 2 parameter. And we used a wide range of lengths and depths for those things as well. And so that makes up the clouds, the darks. And then the whole idea was, well, how do we make sense out of this? And
Yeah.
how can we use things that we've been working at? So that was one of the reasons we put, if you use SMYS, then these lines would give you an idea of what class you're in, right?
Got it.
And then for the horizontal ones, which have to do with the damage, we used 1 foot radius and 100 foot and 300. And that seemed to fit. 300 is like half of the furlong, right? The 600 feet. Okay, so
Furlong.
yeah, nobody uses furlong
Yeah.
anymore, but it goes back to the original. And we can talk about why we picked 660 feet another time, okay?
Yeah.
But anyway, so we chose half of that, and anything over 300 is a problem. Plus, where it intersected with the clouds
So,
as well.
Last
So-
question related to source data. I heard you say the PHMSA database. Which one? Because there's a lot of PHMSA databases potentially.
Oh, we use the incident one.
Perfect.
Okay.
Gotcha.
And so whatever's in the incident one, we used as a basis for choosing diameter, wall thickness, and defect sizes.
Perfect.
Okay.
So one of the things that's a little sticky in me is if an operator has regulated pipe, then they already have HCAs.
Yes.
How does this help an operator who already has an HCA and has defined response criteria per 192 or 195?
Well, one of the things they do is many of the operators I see just say if it's in an HCA, then that's it. But now, maybe what you want to do is it going to rupture or is it going to leak?
Yeah.
Right? So if it's leak, don't give it the same priority in response that you would for a rupture.
Gotcha.
Now, to make it even simpler an idea, what you could do when you run the circles down, because the circle for the PIR is 1% lethality,
Right.
you could have a target circle. And so you could have a smaller radius for 25% and a smaller one for 50%. And then you could separate out the houses that fall in those circles. And now you have another way of getting granularity into your risk. So now you have the 22 threats, right? And they have a variety of things in it, which are done really well. And now you could have 4 or 5 in consequence. So you can go and work on the ones with the highest risk, the product of the two.
Yeah. It almost makes me think, depending on how they can bring this into their analysis, like the results of your BR, it almost makes me think about how they can start dynamically segmenting an asset.
Yeah, that's
based
what
on
I mean.
lethality rates, for example, right? Where independent, if we call it by GPS location or stationing, it doesn't matter. Again, you're saying this is a tool that can use to complement assessments, i.e., let's say I have an SECDA program and I'm trying to integrate data for me to understand where I might want to go and pinpoint a dig to see if I have SEC. You're saying, well, how would you begin to use consequence in that assessment? This is an example of how you could dynamically segment the line. And then I do my data integration for threat susceptibility and say, you know what, this overlaps with the 50% lethality rate, and I have all of the contributing factors. Where is it a good spot for me to go dig? And if I don't find it, then I know from a consequence perspective, we've
Yeah.
probably done a good job of covering our risk portfolio.
Well, you can then get the high priority ones,
Yeah.
right? And you know, when you do the dig, you
Yeah.
use that as verification too,
Yep.
to help refine what you're doing as well. So yeah, the whole idea of the granularity is to do your segmentation, but in better spots, so that you can do digs in one area,
Yeah.
right, and not dig up the whole freaking countryside.
So I want to bring it home. Thanks for sharing all this with us. Where do you guys go from here? Is there a future for this work, or do you see it? I mean, I know you're passionate about increasing granularity on the consequence side. Do you see this work continuing?
Well, the work was originally done for PHMSA for the 30%, right? And so these are the ideas that we've talked about, Dan Ursai and myself. And going farther, I think, depends on people using it and the feedback.
Yeah.
I think that's the important part, because we can think of things, but they may not be as useful as other people have.
Gotcha.
You know, one
All
of
right.
the things that comes to mind, I guess maybe we'll try to bring it home with this. You know, one of the things we try to use this podcast for is awareness, right? The idea is like, now hopefully all of our podcast listeners hear and say, hey, there's this body of work out there. So if I'm dealing with upstream gathering lines and I'm trying to risk rank, if I'm dealing with LDC and I'm trying to risk rank, this is a tool. It's a PPIM paper. Where would you say you guys are sharing and creating awareness about this work?
Well, we're trying to get it into the standard for B318, right?
Yep.
That's one. And doing these things and talking at PPIM are others to make people aware of things. And then as they begin to use it, then we'll find out better ways to refine the idea. But this is an aid. Actually, I would suggest people should do the work and do the calculations for fitness for service first, and then they would have a better idea, because
Of
there's
what fed in.
uncertainty with
So
this.
you said feedback and start using it. So they should email you directly. Is that right? Is that what we're hearing?
Yes, they can do that. And the other thing is, I need to put, because it's a huge report, we need to put on this podcast where you can get it and download the whole report.
We can
right?
put the links in the show notes for sure. So I want to thank you again for joining us, Keith. I'm going to wrap it up. To our audience, want to thank you. Take a look at the Basic Rupture Framework or read Keith's paper. And again, welcome as the 51st state. It's great to have you on board. Thank you for joining this episode of Pipeline Things. BR1 for the audience is there is
Leak.
no rupture.
Yeah, it's
Yes,
leak.
all leak. Right,
Yeah.
right. BR2 is where you have it leaks in corrosion.
Hi, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. May I have your autograph?
Oh yeah, sure, absolutely. So it's our first opportunity for an autograph.
Oh, sorry, not you.
Oh, thank you.
Are you serious?
What is?
Give me your pen, thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm such a
You're
fan.
welcome.
Just happened?
There you go.
Chris, I'm not sure what just happened. We have had people ask for our autograph, but now I feel like
we did have a first, and we were kind of on a high yesterday. We got our first autograph. request,
humility
so I was
is
like- I
so
was like-
much to eat.
I was like, dude, we're on a roll. That was
Well,
grounding.
might as well. Can we
Excellent.
just get your autograph too? I don't want you to stop
yeah.
there. I mean, I want one too for remembrance.
What
We-
shall I say for you? Oh, yeah, I know.
To my favorite podcasters. No. Well, audience, you might have to come back later on for me to hear what
You notice I use the Canadian spelling.
I can't read your handwriting. Will you please
Well,
read
he's
it?
a doctor, so it kind of makes sense.